The wreck had been drifting for weeks before it finally snagged in Veritha's rest debris belt. Rael Donovan saw it on his scanner at breakfast, marked it, finished his food, and then went out to cut it apart. That was the job. That was every day. Veritha's rest was not the kind of place people chose. It was the kind of place people ended up. A low-gravity moon with a permanent gray haze, 2 small settlements, and enough derelict ships drifting in from the outer lanes to keep a salvage operator busy. Rael had been here 6 years. He had stopped counting after 3. The wreck was a freighter, roughly, though its hull design matched nothing in his database. The metal was darker than it should have been, almost purple in the morning light, and the joints were fused in a way that suggested extreme heat at some point in its past. Rael moved through it carefully with his cutter. He did not rush. Rushing in a wreck got people killed. He found the cargo pod near the rear of the ship, sealed tight. With a locking mechanism, he had to study for 10 minutes before he understood how to open it. When he finally cracked the seal, 2 things happened at once. Warmth came out. Real warmth. Not residual engine heat, but the kind of warmth that belonged to a living thing. And something cried. It was not a loud sound. It was thin and insistent, like a noise made by something that had been making it for a long time without anyone answering. Rael stood in the doorway of the pod and looked inside. The creature was coiled in the far corner, nestled in what looked like a melted-down pile of soft metal that had been shaped, deliberately, into something like a nest. It was small, roughly the size of a loaf of bread. For limbs, a long tail, a narrow head, and scales the color of old copper catching afternoon light. A warm, burnished amber bronze that shifted as it moved. It looked at him. The eyes were violet. Not dark violet, not almost black violet, but a clear, bright, fully present violet that had no business being in the eyes of something this small. It looked at him the way a person looks at someone they have been waiting for. Not with fear, not with aggression, with an assessment that seemed, somehow, to conclude in his favor. Rael stood there for a long moment. He thought about his scanner. He thought about the colony's biology station, run by a man named Peter who would immediately file 17 forms with the Galactic Accord and have the creature in a containment jar by nightfall. He thought about what the right thing to do was. The creature made the thin sound again. Rael picked it up. It was warm in his hands, warmer than anything that size had a right to be, and it stopped making the sound almost immediately. It looked up at him and made a different sound, quieter, lower, something almost like a question. He put it in his cargo satchel, which was lined with insulation foam. He went back to the wreck and finished cutting it apart. He did good, thorough work, the same as every other day. That evening, in his workshop, he fed it strips of protein ration from his fingers. It ate with great seriousness. He called it the lizard because he had to call it something, and that seemed accurate enough. 3 days later, he was calling it her, and he did not remember deciding to. Warden Oren came by on a Thursday. Oren ran the colony's small administrative office and visited Rael periodically, mostly to confirm he had not died alone in a wreck somewhere. He stood in the doorway of the workshop, looked at the creature sitting on Rael's workbench chewing the end of a calibration stylus, and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. That, Oren said, is going to be a problem. She's a lizard, Rael said. He did not look up from the relay coupling he was rebuilding. That is not a lizard. She eats, sleeps, and chews things. Lizard behavior. Oren looked at the faint, steady glow coming from between the creature's scales, a soft amber light, barely visible in the bright workshop, but unmistakably there. He looked at her eyes, which were currently fixed on him with an intelligence that made him feel, slightly, as if he were the one being examined. Rael, he said carefully. She's glowing. Warm-blooded species often have bioluminescent. She's glowing, Rael. I know, Rael said. She does that. Oren left without resolving anything, which was usually how his visits to Rael ended. That night, Rael lay on his cot and the creature, the lizard, he told himself, climbed onto his chest and settled there. She was warm, warmer than a blanket. Her weight was slight, barely there, and she breathed slowly, evenly, the amber glow of her scales pulsing very faintly in the dark. Rael stared at the ceiling. Then she exhaled, a long, slow breath. And in the quiet, under everything, she made a sound. One syllable, soft enough that he could almost believe it was the wind through the gaps in his hull plating. He could not identify the word. He did not recognize the language. But it sounded, in a way he could not explain and did not want to think about, like the sound a name makes when someone who knows you says it. He told himself he was almost asleep. He told himself it was nothing. He lay awake for another 2 hours. Nobody taught Rael how to care for a dragon. There was no manual for it, no database entry, no expert he could quietly message without also starting a chain of events he had no interest in starting. So he did what he always did when he had a problem he did not understand. He paid attention, made notes, and adjusted. 3 months in, the notes were getting strange. She had learned his schedule in the first week, which he put down to the fact that animals were smart. She had learned to stay out of the way when he had the cutter running, which he called good instinct. She had learned that the left panel of the heating unit made a sound before it clicked on, and she would move away from it precisely 3 seconds before it fired, which he wrote down and tried not to think about too hard. She was still small, still copper bronze, still violet-eyed, still warm to the touch. She had grown perhaps half again her original size, which put her somewhere between a large cat and a small dog, and she moved around the workshop with a kind of deliberate care that did not belong to a creature her age. Rael had adjusted his salvage hours. He told himself it was because he needed to reorganize his schedule anyway. He traded a good circuit board to the supply runner for a thermal sleeping mat, the kind rated for cold climate operations, and put it in the corner where she liked to sleep. He told himself it was cheaper than replacing the floor insulation she had been lying on. He caught himself explaining things to her. Not baby talking, nothing like that. Just explaining. He would be rebuilding a valve assembly, and he would say, in the same voice he used for everything, the secondary seal goes in before the gasket or the whole thing blows when you pressurize it. And she would watch his hands, with focused, specific attention. Not the way an animal watches movement. The way a person watches a demonstration. He wrote that down too. Then he closed the notebook. The navigation console incident happened on a Tuesday. He had been reviewing stellar charts the night before, tracing the probable origin route of the purple-hulled freighter out of habit, and he had fallen asleep at the console. When he woke and moved to the kitchen, she climbed up onto the chair. He had seen her do it before. She liked the seat warmth, and he thought nothing of it. He came back 20 minutes later. The chart on the screen had changed. It had been zoomed out, far out. It now showed not the local debris corridor, but the entire sector, and a cluster of stars in the far upper quarter had been, not circled, exactly, but the view had been centered on them. Adjusted so they sat precisely in the middle of the display. Rael stood in the doorway with his coffee. She sat in the chair and looked at him. He walked to the console. He looked at the star cluster. He did not recognize it from his standard charts, but it had the faint registry tag of a region beyond the mapped frontier. He looked at her. She looked back. He reached past her and closed the chart. She did not react. She jumped down from the chair and went to eat from her bowl, and the morning continued. Rael told himself there was a sensor glitch in the scroll function. He wrote the star cluster coordinates in his notebook anyway. The Drathy broadcast changed things. The Drathy were one of the old species, not aggressive, not particularly interested in human affairs, prone to transmitting long cultural archives on short-range channels that most people ignored. Rael always ignored them. The language was layered in a way that resisted translation software, and the content was usually elder poetry or ancestral records dense enough to be meaningless without context. When the broadcast hit his comm unit that afternoon, he noticed it for half a second and went back to work. She crossed the entire workshop in 4 seconds. He had never seen her move that fast. She was at the comm unit before he registered she had stood up, and she sat in front of it, perfectly still, with her head slightly tilted, and she listened. Her scales brightened as she sat there. The copper bronze warmed towards something closer to gold, not bright, not dramatic, but visible, a slow and steady shift that faded and returned like a pulse. The broadcast ran for 11 minutes. She did not move. When it ended, she sat for a long time in the quiet. Then she walked back to her mat and lay down, and her scales returned to their normal color, and she closed her eyes. Rael had recorded the broadcast without thinking. He played 12 seconds of it back. The sounds meant nothing to him. They were structured, clearly linguistic, but beyond that, nothing. Oren arrived the following morning with a data packet and a look on his face that Rael did not like. The Galactic Accord's Biological Survey Division had flagged an anomalous life sign in Veritha's rest debris field, detected 3 months back. The scan matched nothing in their registry. They were requesting a colony report. Rail read the packet. He set it down. He looked at her, awake now, watching him from the mat with those violet eyes. He picked up the packet and deleted it. Oren watched the whole thing. He did not say a word. That night, alone in the dark, Rail said to her, half a joke, mostly not, "What are you, anyway?" She looked at him. She opened her mouth. She said one syllable, the same one as before. But he was awake this time. He heard it clearly. He understood, with the certainty of something landing rather than something understood, that she was not saying her own name. She was saying his. Rail had fixed things his entire working life. Broken relays, failed seals, cracked hull sections, machinery that people had given up on. He had a method. When something did not make sense, he did not panic. He looked at it from every angle until one of them yielded. Then he got to work. The problem, this time, was that he did not have enough angles. He knew what she had said. He knew it was his name, not the name on his colony registration, not the name his parents gave him, but something else. Something that fit him the way a key fits a lock that was made for it specifically. He could not explain how he knew that. He knew it the same way he knew when a hull was about to fail, not from a single sign, but from all the signs together, adding up to a certainty he could not argue himself out of. He sat with it for 4 days. Then he packed a bag, arranged for Oren to check on her twice daily, and took the short-haul shuttle to the Drathy way station. The way station rotated slowly against the stars, a wide flat structure that looked more like a compressed library than a vessel. It smelled, even through the docking corridor, of old parchment and something faintly mineral, like stone after rain. The Drathy who received him at the entrance was young by their standards, which meant she looked only slightly older than the landscape. Elder Suvai was not young. She met him in a circular chamber lined with concentric rings of carved glyphs that covered every surface from floor to ceiling. She moved carefully, the way very old things move, as though each step had been considered and approved in advance. She indicated a low seat. Rail sat. She sat across from him and folded her hands and waited. He described everything. The wreck, the pod, the creature, the warmth, the violet eyes, the glow, the navigation chart, the broadcast. He described how she had reacted to the Drathy transmission, the slow gold shift in her scales. He described the sound she had made in the dark and again in the light, and what it had felt like to hear it. When he finished, Suvai was still for a long time. "Did she speak to you?" Suvai said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." "In what language?" "I don't know. I couldn't identify it." Suvai closed her eyes. She kept them closed for long enough that Rail wondered if she had gone to sleep. Then she opened them and looked at him with an expression he could not read in a face that had had a long time to learn how to be unreadable. "Tell me what you felt when she said it," Suvai said. He thought about saying nothing. Then he said, like something clicking into place, like a name that belonged to me that I had just never been told. Suvai nodded once, slowly. She told him what she knew. The Orcs were not a species in the way the Accord classified species. They were a lineage, a line of bonded creatures whose existence was tied, in ways that the Drathy had spent centuries trying to understand and never fully managed, to the idea of recognition. The Orcs did not choose companions. They recognized them. Something in a person, not strength, not intelligence, not any quality that translated into Accord standard metrics, something that had no word in any living language. The Orcs perceived it, and when they did, they gave it a name. Not a name they invented, the name that was already there, already true, already the person's, waiting to be spoken by the one thing in the universe that could read it. Rail listened without interrupting. "Most of the Orcs are gone," Suvai said. "The last confirmed record is 430 years old. Before that, there were sightings. Before that, there was history. Before that, there were stories. Whatever you found in that wreck is, by any record I have access to, not possible." Rail looked at his hands. Then he said, "She's a hatchling." "Yes." "She needs to eat. She chews my tools. She sleeps on my work boots when I leave them out." "Yes," Suvai said. "I imagine she does." "What does the name mean?" "The one she said." Suvai was quiet for a moment. "There is no translation. Not because the records were lost, but because the language it comes from was never built for translation. The closest any Drathy scholar has come is a feeling, not a phrase. She paused. Something like, the one who stays when everything says leave, or the warmth that does not need to understand what it warms. Or, more simply, she looked at him steadily. The kind. The room was very quiet. Rail sat with that for a while. You should know, Suvai said, that an Ortha's return will not go unnoticed. The Galactic Accord has protocols for entities outside their classification system. The protocols are not cruel. They are simply very permanent. Rail nodded. He thanked her. He left. On the shuttle back, he thought about what permanent meant in the context of a creature that looked at him like he was the answer to a question she had been carrying alone in a sealed pod for a very long time. She was waiting at the door when he arrived. She was larger than when he had left, not dramatically, not impossibly, but measurably. She bumped her head against his hand, once, hard enough to actually move him half a step sideways. He sat down on the step outside the workshop. She curled around his boots. The gas giant hung in the sky overhead, orange and massive and completely indifferent. I'm going to be terrible at this, he said quietly. She made a sound. It did not agree with him. The Accord frigate appeared in orbital holding above Veritha's rest on a Wednesday. Rail saw it on the colony's shared scanner feed while he was eating. He noted the registry. He finished eating. He went and found Oren. How long have we got? He said. Oren looked at the feed. Shuttle descent takes 40 minutes from that altitude. Call it tomorrow morning. They'll want to be official about it. Good. Rail pulled up his chair at the archive console. I need access to the Accord legal database. Full text. Oren stared at him. That database has about 90,000 documents. I know which ones I need, Rail said. I've had 3 weeks. He had started reading the day he came back from the Drathy way station. It was not the kind of reading he was accustomed to. Legal language was its own broken machinery, full of cross-references and qualifications that needed to be held in mind simultaneously. But he had a good memory and no patience for giving up. He had found the relevant article on the 14th day. He had found the treaty on the 21st. Delegate Ferris arrived at 10 in the morning. She was precisely what Rail had expected, smooth, composed, and in possession of a document case that she set on his workbench with the careful deliberateness of someone who wanted you to understand that everything inside it was already decided. She had 2 Accord officers with her, and a specialist with a containment scanner that he kept aimed at the workshop floor in a way that was meant to seem casual and did not. She smiled at Rail. It was a professional smile, built for difficult conversations in remote locations. Mr. Donovan, she said, I'll keep this simple. The Accord has identified an unregistered and unclassified biological entity on Veritha's rest. Under Article 9 of the Biological Sovereignty Charter, I'm authorized to take custody for study and safe containment. The word safe landed with a slight extra weight, the way people say it when they want you to feel reassured rather than because you should be. Can I see the charter? Rail said. She handed it over. He read it. Not quickly, not performatively slowly, at the pace of someone reading something important and intending to remember it. Article 9, subsection 4, he said. Your authority applies to organisms without demonstrated cognition or established behavioral bonding with a recognized sentient. Is that your reading? Ferris did not change her expression. The article's language is reasonably clear. It is, Rail agreed. Which is why I filed a bonded entity declaration this morning under the Suvai Compact of 2241. The compact predates the charter and was never repealed. It grants provisional sovereign status to bonded pairs, pending adjudication. Ferris was quiet for 3 full seconds. Behind her, the containment specialist had stopped moving his scanner. The Suvai Compact, she said, has never been applied. It's never been needed before, Rail said. It still exists. He pulled up the filing confirmation on his console and turned it so she could see the timestamp. Filed at 0620 that morning. Oren, standing in the doorway, said nothing. He had helped find the document. He felt this was contribution enough. Ferris looked at the confirmation. She looked at the warrant in her document case. She looked at the workshop, specifically at the corner where Solène was lying, watching the entire exchange with her head rested on her front legs and her violet eyes moving between each speaker with quiet, unhurried attention. I'll need to refer this to adjudication, Ferris said, carefully. I'll grant a 72-hour hold. But I want to be clear, Mr. Donovan. The Accord's position is firm. So is mine, Rail said. You're welcome to use the colony's common room while you wait. Orin can show you where it is. After they left, the workshop was quiet for a while. Rail sat down on his stool. He felt the tension come out of his shoulders in stages, like air leaving a pressurized line. Selene raised her head. She looked at him. Then she stood, walked across the workshop. She was larger now, roughly the size of a big dog, and her movement was heavier and quieter at once, and she sat down in front of him. She looked at the door Ferris had left through, then back at him. Her scales had done something during the exchange. Not the soft gold glow of the Drathy broadcast. Something flat. A dimming of the copper bronze to something closer to stone, dull and still. Rail had not seen it before. He filed it away. He put his hand on the top of her head. I know, he said. That night she was larger again. He got the measuring tape, marked her height on the workshop wall, and stared at the mark for a moment. Horse-sized within the week, he estimated. He looked at the size of his workshop door. He looked at her. She was watching him do the math. You're going to need to sleep outside soon, he told her. She shifted her position and rested her chin on his knee, which with her current neck length was entirely possible and somewhat inconvenient. He stayed where he was. He did not move her. He had filed the paperwork. He had made the argument. He had bought 72 hours. Now he sat in his workshop with a growing dragon on his knee, and the honest truth was that he did not know if any of it was going to be enough. He had been in worse positions. He thought about that for a while. He could not immediately remember when. The adjudication chamber aboard the Accord frigate was designed to feel neutral, which meant it was designed to feel like it belonged to no one. White walls, recessed lighting, a long table for the panel of 3 adjudicators, a smaller table on each side for the presenting parties. The chairs were the same on both sides. The temperature was the same throughout. Selene did not fit in a chair. Rail had stated, in his written preparation, that the subject of the hearing was a bonded entity under the Sci-Fi Compact and was therefore entitled to be present during any proceeding that affected her status. The adjudicators had debated it and then permitted it because the Compact's language was actually quite clear on that point, and they had no grounds to refuse without prejudicing the ruling before it started. She lay along the right wall of the chamber. She was calm, and she was large. She had grown again in the 2 nights since the hold was granted, and she now occupied a space roughly the size of a parked cargo vehicle. Her scales had returned to their full copper-bronze warmth. Her eyes moved between the faces in the room with that same slow, particular attention. Ferris presented first. She was efficient. She laid out the Accord's position in clean, logical order. Unknown organism, no registry match, no classification, containment required under standard Article 9 provisions. She acknowledged the Sci-Fi Compact, but argued it had never been ratified into active Accord law, existed only as a historical footnote, and had no applicable mechanism for enforcement. She was, Rail had to admit, very good. Rail presented second. He had no lawyer. He had his notebook, his notes, a copy of the compact with key sections tabbed, and Sci-Fi's transmission, sent the previous night, unsolicited, confirming the compact's standing under Drathy treaty law, which the Accord had separately agreed to honor in 2309. He laid out his argument in the same voice he used for everything, level, specific, unhurried. He watched the 3 adjudicators. He could read people. He had been reading people in remote locations for 6 years, in negotiations over salvage rights and supply contracts, and he knew what it looked like when an argument was landing and when it was not. It was not landing. Not because his argument was wrong, because the Accord was very old and very certain of itself, and the kind of certainty that had been building for centuries did not bend to a human with a notebook, even a correct one. The adjudicators were not bad people. They were people inside a system, and the system had a direction, and the direction was not his. He was losing. He could feel it, the way you feel a seal beginning to fail before you hear it. Then the head adjudicator turned to Ferris. For the record, delegate. What classification is the Accord proposing for the subject entity? Ferris opened her document case. Selene spoke. It was not loud. It was a single sound, open and sustained, and it did not come from a place in the room that sound usually came from. It came from everywhere in the chamber at once, the way temperature comes from everywhere. filling space rather than crossing it. Every person at both tables went still. Rael went still too. He had heard her make sounds before. This was not the same. This was older than she was. It was her voice, and it was also not only her voice. It carried something beneath it, a resonance that had nothing to do with volume, as though something had been sleeping inside the sound of her and had, just now, decided to wake. The chamber's recessed lighting did not change. Nothing moved. But every person in that room felt the distinct and irreducible sensation of being in the presence of something that had been in the universe longer than any of them, and that had a very specific thing to say. It said Rael's name. Not the name on his colony registration. The other one. The true one. He heard it the way he had heard it before, the click of a key in a lock made for it. But this time the room heard it too. He could see it in their faces, the way the two younger adjudicators' expressions shifted, not into fear, not into awe, but into a kind of quiet understanding, like something settling. The head adjudicator's hand, which had been reaching for a stylus, stopped moving. Ferris sat with her document case open in front of her and her eyes fixed on Solen. She heard it too. Rael could see that she heard it. Not the sound. She heard what it meant. The meaning did not need a translation, and it did not ask permission. It simply was, the way a fact is, the way the temperature of something held in the hand is, unambiguous and complete. The sound ended. The chamber was silent for a long time. Ferris closed her document case. She did not announce it. She did not explain it. She set the case on the table with a quiet, final click and said, in a voice that was very professionally level and gave almost nothing away, "The Accord withdraws its petition for containment." The head adjudicator looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his two colleagues. Some kind of decision passed between them without words. "The matter is marked resolved," he said. "Bonded pair status granted under the Sci-Fi Compact. Provisional sovereign classification." He paused. "This panel will note for the record that a new classification category has been opened today." Nobody said anything else. On the shuttle back to Veritha's Rest, Solen's head was in Rael's lap. This was impractical. She was now far too large for it to work without her being folded at an uncomfortable angle and her weight distributed across two seats and part of a storage panel. She had managed it anyway, with the same deliberate care she applied to everything. Rael looked out the viewport at the stars. "After a long time," he said, "you could have done that 7 months ago." She exhaled, slow and warm, across the front of his boots. He took that as a full answer. The gas giant grew in the viewport ahead of them. Orange and enormous and, as always, entirely indifferent. Rael did not feel indifferent. He felt something quieter and more durable than relief. The part of this that could have gone badly wrong was finished. What came next was a different kind of question, and it was one he found, to his mild surprise, that he did not mind facing. A year after the hearing, the warmest structure on Veritha's Rest was Rael's workshop. This was because Solen slept curled around its exterior at night, and her body heat soaked into the walls and the floor and stayed there. Rael had not planned it that way. He had not planned most of how the last year had gone. But most of how the last year had gone turned out to be fine. She was large now. Very large. The kind of large that required the colony to quietly redraw its boundary maps, because 2 of the original survey markers were under her tail when she slept. Oren had handled this with admirable composure. He had simply moved the markers and filed the paperwork under habitat adjustment. Nobody reviewed the filing. Nobody was going to. The salvage work was different now. Better, in the practical sense. Solen could lift hull sections in 5 seconds that would have taken Rael 2 hours to cut free. She did this without being asked. Whenever she could see that the geometry of a job called for it, she would land beside the wreck, look at the section he was working on, look at him, and then simply pick it up and set it where it needed to go. He paid her in food, which she accepted as a fair arrangement. He still talked to her while he worked. He had stopped apologizing to himself for doing it. The Drathy came in the 3rd month after the hearing. Not Sci-Fi alone this time. A proper delegation, 6 scholars and the elder herself, arriving on a clean, quiet vessel that docked at the colony's main port with a respectfulness that impressed even Oren. They were not there to take anything or require anything. Sci-Fi had explained that in her message ahead of the visit. She explained it again in person, standing in front of Rael's workshop in the afternoon light, while Solen lay with her head resting on the roof and watched the proceedings from above. There are species in this galaxy, Suvai said, that remember the Orth, that carry old grief about their disappearance. They need to know what has happened, not to interfere, simply to know. To grieve properly, Rail said. And then, yes, to be glad. He thought about it. He thought about what it meant to be the person standing in the middle of something that mattered to the galaxy. He did not want to be a symbol. He had no particular interest in significance. She still choose my tools, he said. Suvai did not smile exactly. It was more like something in her face settled. That will not change. I know, he said. I buy cheap ones now. The delegation stayed for 4 days. They sat with Solen for long hours, the Drathy scholars, and sometimes they spoke in their layered language, and sometimes they simply sat. Solen was patient with all of it. More patient than Rail, if he was honest. On the last evening of their visit, in the long warm light before Veritha's rest's slow sunset, Solen spoke. In galactic common, clear, unhurried, slightly formal in the way of someone who has learned a language from records rather than conversation, but perfectly correct. She thanked Elder Suvai for the archive broadcasts. She said she had heard them in the early months, before she had words for anything, and that they had helped her remember what she was. She thanked Orin for the treaty, which she had known existed but could not have located without him. She said this with the same level seriousness she brought to everything, and Orin received it with the expression of a man who was going to spend a very long time pretending he had not been moved by it. Then she looked at Rail. She did not make a speech. She did not say anything complicated or weighty or designed for the delegation to hear. She said his name, the true one, quietly, the way you say something that is just for one person. And Rail, who had heard it before, in the dark, in a legal chamber, in the thin sound of a hatchling in a sealed pod, felt it this time differently, not as a surprise, not as a revelation, as something arriving that he had, without knowing it, been waiting for since long before he found a warm and violet-eyed creature in a broken ship in a debris field, as something that fit. The delegation departed the following morning. Orin went with them to the dock and came back without saying much, which was its own kind of communication. The days after that were the same as the days before, more or less. Rail did salvage work. Solen helped, or watched, or slept in the sun when the cloud cover broke. He talked to her while he worked. She watched his hands. The galaxy was doing something out there. He got messages, sometimes, from Suvai, about old species that had learned what happened on Veritha's rest, about quiet conversations in places he would never visit. He read the messages and filed them and went back to work. He was not required to be more than what he was. He had not been asked to be. He had found her. He had fed her. He had read 90,000 pages of Accord law and filed the paperwork correctly. He had sat on the step with her curled around his boots and told her he would be terrible at it, and she had disagreed, and she had been right. That was the whole of it. Night came over Veritha's rest the way it always did. Slowly, the gas giant holding its orange light in the sky long after the sun dropped. Rail sat on the step of his workshop. Solen was everywhere around him, vast and warm, her presence the temperature of the air and the quality of the dark. She exhaled slowly, long and easy. Every window in the workshop fogged with warmth from the inside. Rail drank his coffee. The stars came out. He did not say anything, and neither did she. Some things do not need saying once they have already been named.